Said, my name's Andy White. I'm the founder of Boreal Design and Construction. We're a small outfit out of Waterbury that's focused on the delivery of design-driven, high-performance single-family homes, primarily. And I'll get into my background a little bit more later, but first I want to address this problem that I see facing us not only as building professionals, but also as members of vibrant, healthy communities, as well as stewards of our natural world. And that's essentially a shortage of good, high-performance, affordable housing. And I don't mean affordable in terms of Section 8 or a government definition, but housing that is of high quality and a low energy footprint that is actually attainable to the majority of folks out there. And it's a important question at this time where we find ourselves in the midst of a climate crisis globally, as well as a national housing shortage. And if you are trying to escape the rent trap right now and buy or build a home, there also appears to be an economic crisis at hand where prices are just skyrocketing beyond what's reasonably attainable for most folks. I don't think that housing can solve all of these issues outright, but I do think that the things that we build and the way that we build them can serve to address some of these challenges. So this project actually fits into like a greater interest of mine in trying to parse out how we can do this. There are quite a few examples of projects that achieve two of the three of these, right? So you can find a lot of high performance homes that are beautiful and they are astronomically expensive, typically. And at the other end of that, you will find some more mass construction type projects or cookie cutter type of houses or Habitat for Humanity projects where they put the affordability and the performance to the forefront at the expense of kind of I've been trying to find another word besides joy to use all the time, but I keep coming back to that one, right? Like the excitement or the hominess or the tactile quality or being able to, feel like it's yours or a place that causes you to engage with the outdoors or have like a moment of connection with some time of day or a view or something. That often falls by the wayside in favor of building thick walls on what are essentially double wides. And I don't mean to discount any of this work. I think that it's all extremely important and it all has a place. But the challenge that I have been coming up to and what we tackle in this project, I think, was trying to thread that needle and try to find a way to do all of them. I immediately rambled past my intended speech here, but going back to my background a little bit, I grew up in Connecticut in a fairly rural for Connecticut part of town, and always like the outdoors, making things, architecture. I graduated from the University of Vermont in 2007 with a degree in environmental science with a focus on ecological design. And I was very moved by the way that it grounded architecture in the site and in the performance of the building and how wise design choices could, at no cost to the owner, make a house that is much more comfortable to be in, brighter, lower embodied or operational energy footprint. And when I got out of school, I went to work for Chuck Reese is a builder out of Heinsberg, building carbon neutral homes. And this is a project that I worked on in 2007 in Heinsberg. called South Farm, where it was, ahead of its curve at the time. Double stud walls, cellulose insulation. You can see the on-site PV solar production there. The buildings are oriented such that they're cut into the grade on the north sides. They take advantage of the insulating quality of the grade, south-facing glass, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of things have come to be more commonplace since then, but at the time that was, kind of out there at the front edge. These were designed by Truex Collins in Burlington. But people would ask me about the projects, what I'm working on, who I'm working for, what these guys are like, and we came to kind of like lovingly refer to the clients as the rich hippie demographic, which is, these are guys who could go and buy a 5,000 square foot McMansion, and because of their values, they chose to build a 1,600 square foot super insulated carbon neutral home. And I would say, I guess it's not quite objectively, but that's better, right? Like, these are beautiful little houses, they're arranged nicely. It's much better than a series of McMansions on this undisturbed hillside in Heinsberg. But it was impressed, I realized it then and I realize it now, that if we really want to move the needle or have a meaningful impact, if we want to save the world through the things that we build, we need to find some strategies to make this technology more readily available to more people. So that's a different project we don't need to get into right now. We can skip that one too. That one's pretty. You know what, we'll get back. So I went to graduate school in Oregon. All right. So I decided to put a pin in that question of saving the world through building for a little while. And I moved to Truckee, California, outside of Lake Tahoe, and actually built lakefront mansions 3 seasons and skied 100 days a year. So I took a little break from that. But after a while, that was not as meaningful as it could be. I went to the University of Oregon and got a master's degree in architecture. And there I continued to look into what we could do, how we build things different, et cetera, to achieve these goals. This was a studio project that I did. There was a lot more drawings that look a lot better, but this is looking at essentially a housing module that could be developed for super low cost. That's high performance, could be configured in a variety of orientations, added onto over time, picked up with a crane, et cetera, et cetera. The takeaway being that the only way to embracing very simple forms and using inexpensive materials in creative ways seems to be one of the keys to driving that cost down. I didn't set out to make a little rectangle. It was driven toward that by my findings, and then I decided to just embrace the rectangular nature of the thing. This is a firm I worked for in Portland after getting out of graduate school, and I think this is a nice example of, again, these are pretty nice materials that they're using, but highlighting the materials, the structure, rather than taking a pressure-treated beam and covering it, or taking whatever that beam is up there, right, a quadruple LVL or something, and then wrapping it in drywall, and then mudding that drywall and filling the screw holes, and then painting it. If you can just leave the materials visible and honor the work that they're doing and express the beauty in them, it's not a sure thing, but there is possibility for reduction of cost in that, as well as tying the building to its site, kind of honoring the means and the materials involved in the construction of the building, giving more grounding and meaning to the building, can be done essentially at no additional cost, right? If you're forward-thinking and wise about how you tackle that. Excuse me. So then, I moved back here in 2017, started Boreal Design. This is just, kind of a cruder, rougher take on that same concept. This is my own house, right, where you can see just dimensional lumber, exposed as part of essentially as the ornament, and exploring some different wall construction methods. This would be a Larson truss we used on this project. There's my brother helping me out for the weekend. compact footprint. This is another project. But anyway, so that's kind of, I had already been on a fairly long journey when Sam and Chrissy approached me about building their house. And, you know, what I found is, you know, you have to be like innovative in your use of materials. You have to make little sacrifices. You can't just take a normal spec home and smush it down and add insulation and make it good. It doesn't really work that way. So when they came to me and were like, yeah, we are a couple young professionals with a very limited budget, but we appreciate environmental stewardship and design, and we are okay with some slightly unconventional methods or aesthetics. I was like, this sounds great. Let's, perfect, let's do it. This was actually interesting for me going back through some older documents. This is the program statement that we slapped together in the original design agreement before we had done any schematic design or exploration of anything like that. The home set in an open field will be expressive and playful in its use of materials, division of spaces, and connection to the outdoors. The design will blur the lines between indoor and outdoor space and embrace the views from the site, creating a sense of openness and a relatively small footprint. There was some other stuff about how many bedrooms and bathrooms and whatnot. It is to be a place for joyful gathering and thoughtful reflection that is intentional in its use of materials, connects its users to the greater site, and minimizes its impact on the environment. And reflecting on the project, I mean, we'll see. I think we did a pretty good job. But, you know, so they were okay with living in a small footprint, right? But they wanted 2 bedrooms, 1.5 baths, a dining area, a kitchen, and a living room, a functional mudroom entry, a mechanical room, and then some kind of outdoor space as much as possible. In an attempt to come in near on budget, we kind of set ourselves a goal of approximately 800 square feet, which is very tight for that program. If you go and start looking at comparable projects online, you find, you know, whatever, passive house, 900 square feet, it's often like a loft and eat-in kitchen. Things like that are pretty common. So that was kind of a tall order from the jump. And then we wanted to hit these kind of general targets for like R40 walls, R40 floor, R60 roof, airtight construction. So like, we didn't specify the windows or anything, but the big part was they were trying to hit a budget number of right around $250,000, which was very tight. And we had that, it basically was like, we're gonna try, you know, like we can do something. Is that a question? Or? Yeah.
Does that include like site work and facility costs?
That included everything at the first meeting.
Everything.
Yeah. That number evolved a little as we went along. I'll revisit the final numbers that we got to once I get into the project a little bit more here. But yeah, so we kind of had our work cut out for us there, and I went to work on the design. I took, you know, they'd been sketching up things and working in SketchUp, trying to figure out what they wanted for a long time, and had some pretty strong feelings about, you know, their design already. I totally overlooked so their little SketchUp model apparently to them resembled a dead squirrel in some way. Am I getting that right? Okay, we don't need to get into it. Dead Squirrel House keeps coming up. I kept trying to lose that name, and I was met with resistance. So I thought I would bring it back in for you here at the end, in front of everybody. You know, okay. It was black. It had a little thing. I thought it looked like it. Anyway, so I went through just based on the footprint, and basically adapted a plan from their original concept. I took what they had and did my best to make it work in the most like economical and the to my mind, the best way possible within these constraints. And then we had kind of the most basic version, and this other, I would say, more interesting version. Let me see. I don't want to run out of time. I think we'll be okay. Yeah, let me just show you real quick what these things look like. Maybe it's not interesting to you. I thought it was interesting going back to my early work and seeing, the elements of these original designs that are still present in the final project. So maybe you guys will appreciate that as well. So I put together a little video for them because it was the easiest way to understand these things in 3 dimensions. So this was a shifted floor plan based on the thing that they gave me. Pretty simple, right? Bedroom, bath, stair, front porch, back porch, big deck. We didn't end up getting this clear roof at the end of the day, but pretty simple footprint, simple form, simple building. The shed roof was an aesthetic choice from the jump, as well as just kind of functional for how the building interacted with the site and the views. And then this was the kind of simplest version where we just made a real simple box and then put all the stuff outside, right? It was like, okay, so you got a little teeny box to work with, and we're going to try to make a dynamic interior space, but most of the action is going to be happening outdoors, right? So that's it. Kitchen, living, dining, mechanical room, bathroom on the left, stair, and then there's just a bunch of cool outdoor space that happens. I thought that one was pretty good. And then we also looked at this one, which had, I think it was the most compact of the floor plans, basically by shifting these floors. You can see it here. So by playing with the different heights of the floors, how they related to each other, it allowed us to radically reduce the length of the stair, which in a footprint that's essentially 20 by 20, it really eats up a lot of space, especially when you consider 3 feet of circulation at least at either end of the staircase, right? So by kind of taking the spaces that we had and pulling them out of a rectangle and arranging them more in this pinwheel pattern, and then also playing in the Z-axis, it allowed us to cram a whole lot into a small footprint there, even if it didn't have the exciting action on the outside. And they took strongly to this one, I would say. The obvious downside that we discussed at the time is this has a million corners and things like that, but it was an interesting study in the use of space. And I think we learned a lot from going through the whole process, and it gave me, good direction moving into the rest of schematic design, design development, et cetera. So I took this, that back and started crunching some kind of back of envelope original numbers, or not original, but rough numbers for these different things, making it like an apples to apples comparison. I had kind of ABC, most expensive to least expensive figured out, but I didn't know what the top and the bottom was. And basically came away with, this is neat, but you can't afford it. It's probably going to be more like this, but with fewer decks outside. And we also probably can't afford these jogs. This one was too inefficient due to the amount of circulation space that was required, basically. Made the footprint unnecessarily large for what you got out of it. So we sat down and talked through a bunch of strategies to push the thing forward, to get from this point to an actual successful design that we all liked at the end. These are a few of them. I'm sure I missed a couple, but basically the big idea was the envelope is very expensive on these high performance buildings, right? You have a lot going on in there. You have vapor barrier and air barrier and thick walls, insulation. Every corner loses, is harder to insulate well. So basically, make the simplest shape that you possibly can. Within that shape, maximize the volume of the space to the square foot area of the exterior, right? That means like you can, if a room is 8 by 8 by 8, right? If you could stack a bunch of them up, like a big cube is a more efficient inside to outside ratio than like a long, skinny building, for example, which means less passes around the building, less time up on staging, less expensive exterior finishes, less trim, et cetera, et cetera. We're going to define spaces within that larger volume, shrink the stairs to accommodate more living space. Another thing is that if we can define these small spaces within the big volume, small spaces make smaller windows feel bigger, right? So if you are in a situation where you are interacting with a window from 12 feet away and you have a ceiling above your head that's at 8 feet, a 4 foot by 4 foot window feels huge. Whereas if you have a 20 by 30 great room with a fireplace and a generous couch, coffee table set up, and then a dining table, and then a huge kitchen island, and then a kitchen, and then, a 4 foot window looks like a little porthole in the wall when you're standing at the kitchen and you're looking at it across the way. So if we could kind of make the spaces more human scaled and, cozy without being claustrophobic, it allows us to actually save cost on windows and doors and still get that feeling of openness that we were shooting for. We decided to build one big box and sheetrock, mud, and paint the entire thing. And then all of the dynamic activity was going to happen inside of that. So that allowed us to essentially do away with trim, baseboard, all of the mudding of sheetrock, which actually adds up pretty quickly. Paint gets very expensive. These guys ended up doing the paint themselves, but I think even if we had a pro, how long did you guys, it was like a weekend, you painted the whole place, something like that? 3 days maybe? Well, whatever. I mean, that's still pretty decent. And then reconsidering finish materials, like what is the job of this material? What does it have to do? Does it need to be tongue and groove oak? Could it be a sheet good of something else that has actual like similar qualities and feel to it, but comes at a much lower price point, which with a much lower install cost? And then just kind of keeping things simple. There's a lot of right angles in there. Right angles are easy. Simple, clean lines. And then celebrating the material. So celebrating the materials is something that everybody's on board with. It's harder to get a client who's on board with celebrating the fasteners. But yeah, we didn't quite go that far. We mudded the sheetrock screws, but all of like the wood to something else connections, we just let it be what it's going to be. We were intentional with our layout and our screw patterns and things like that. Oh, you're all good.
You're doing great.
Thanks, bud. But if you can find a way to live with these things, and in doing so, I think, I said celebrate the work, but that's kind of exactly what I mean. Like if you can honor, or if you can look at screws in a deck and instead of saying, oh, I wish I paid extra for the hidden fastener system, oh golly, I hate screws, and instead say, screws are part of the deck. They're, in a way, just as beautiful as the deck boards themselves, and they are just as integral a part of the system. Someone had to take the time to put that screw in there. They had to drill the hole. Why would we hide that, If you can do that take, then suddenly you just saved a bunch of money on hidden fasteners, and the install goes faster and everything else, So to, kind of summarize that, real simple outside, complex inside and don't hide things. And I said utilize complexity inside because it's not complexity for its own sake. You'll see the inside's fairly complex, but it's doing a lot of different things. And then debating looking at pictures versus a SketchUp model to get the whole, we'll look at a picture. We'll go back to this, and then we'll look at the SketchUp model. So we took all that, we took their love of that staggered floor plan scheme that we had with all the corners out, and we distilled it down to kind of its essence and simplified it dramatically, trying to hold on to the pieces that we felt were meaningful. And this is a shot of the interior, right? So we used a lot of fir CDX plywood sanded as a finish. You can see the stepping floors in here. And we were able to get, on the upstairs and the downstairs, it's basically, now I am going to go to the SketchUp model so that we can see what's going on. We came up with this simple plan. We'll look at this and then we'll do the SketchUp. So it's just a big box on the exterior, right? It's a big shed. Hang on. You're not supposed to use SketchUp models as a presentation tool, but this project is kind of difficult to get your head around from drawings, and even photographing it is difficult, but it's all there. So you can see the basic floor plan is these, here we go. It's these 4 platforms arranged in a pinwheel shape around the central stair. So we maintained that stepping condition that we had. We ended up moving the entry and the back porch, doing a bunch of other stuff. But we have the entry, and then over here is we roughed it in for a half bath and mechanical room, and it was going to serve as a closet in the meantime. But this is kind of the mudroom area. There's a coat rack over here. This is the living room. You have a self-contained kitchen, and then actually an entire dining room, essentially. And the interior dimensions of this are only 20 by 20 feet. So being able to pull off a dining room in there, I was pretty happy with how that worked out. And by incorporating, the ceiling often steps with the floor, and that allowed us, that creates this additional spatial definition, as well as allowing kind of visual connectivity between different floors, different parts of the building. It allows the that living room is, let's make this big again. Of course, the dimensions are on the framing plan that I didn't put in here. Oh no, it's 8 foot by 12 foot 8, which is tiny to the point that I told them we couldn't build this design and that it was not tenable. And they told me, well, I don't know, it sounds good. Like this whole thing here is a day bed, that's like a couch, and then you can sit up here in the living room and swing your legs over, and that's like an extension of it. And they sold me, and I was like, hey, it's your house, good luck. But the reality of the situation is that you get this really nice spatial definition of, like, when you're in the dining room, you feel like you're in the dining room, and you don't feel like you're in a big empty box. You don't feel like you're in a barn. You feel like an intimate connection to the people around you and the table. But you look over your shoulder and you have a 30-foot line of sight from this corner all the way, well, whatever, from this corner to this corner is 30 feet. You see that full 20 feet, and you actually see, this is what's going to be hard about this one to show in a project. Go back to this. So if you're sitting at the dining table, not only do you see comfortably across to have a conversation with someone in the living room, but you actually see up and out across this landing and out a window beyond. And you can see up to a window here, and there's light washing down in between these two boxes. So the whole idea is that it's these different platforms that support essentially 1, 2, 3 boxes that are the private spaces. So it's two very small bedrooms. And by enclosing the bedrooms only, where the bedroom is only for sleeping, I mean, you can do whatever you want there, but they're not designed to be a hanging out place. But by making the bed nook its own thing, it freed up room where, call this a walk-through closet, call it an upstairs living room, call it whatever you want. It's essentially part of the bedroom as part of, as far as like Zillow would be concerned, that's where the closet is. But it's an open space, and you can talk to somebody who's down there making breakfast, and you can see the light coming through the whole building. Similarly, on this side, this bedroom here is big enough for, these are all queen beds as drawn, right? So this is a queen bed, and you could put a 3-foot wide wardrobe here for a closet, and you have a functional standalone bedroom. And then out here, this is a desk in front of this window. So you actually get a completely distinct office space if you want it, in addition to this quasi living room on the second floor, in addition to 2 bedrooms, plus a laundry closet and a linen closet and a full bath. So by kind of reimagining how we utilize and define these spaces that we have, instead of saying like, what? Oh. Yeah, we're just going to hit that button there. Yeah, so by reimagining this and getting outside the box of what you would see in a Zillow listing, where you'd say like, well, gee, the bedroom is 8 by 9, like no thank you. It's like, yeah, the bedroom is 8 by 9, but it works, and there's a huge window at the foot of the bed, and it doesn't feel claustrophobic, and has beautiful northern light. And if you wanted to in the future, you could enclose this and put a door here, and now you have a bedroom that is 13 by 9 or whatever, and it's quite comfortable. So I think that I've said this before, but Chrissy and Sam, finding a client who is willing to reimagine how they use space and think about what is it that I live in, and how do I live, and how do I want to interact with the other people in my space, and how much privacy do I need, how much do I want, where do I want it, where do I need it. It allowed me to have a lot of fun in the design and the build, and really kind of push some ideas that had been kicking around in my head that I haven't been able to flesh out prior. So let's not get into a wall section just yet. Let's look at some pictures of the inside. This is a building science thing. We could talk about a wall section. We'll talk about a wall section real quick, and then we'll look at a bunch of pictures. This detail is actually taken from a different similar project, because I'm not sure where the detail drawing is for this wall, but it's, for all intents and purposes, it's the same. So I have built a lot of, I sometimes forget what my audience is here. I'm gonna go pretty basic real quick. So insulation is measured in an R value per inch typically. That tells how much insulative value you get per inch of insulation, right? So if you have wood, that's R1 per inch. If you have a foot thick wall of wood, like a log cabin, that's an R12. Foam, board foam, is R5 to R6 per inch, right? So if you had that same 12 inches thick of foam, you'd have an R60 or 72, right? So it is considerably more insulating than wood. So if you're trying to get up to these higher R values, that we're shooting for in this level of high performance construction, you can either use more insulative materials or you can make a deeper wall, right? So dense packed cellulose has an R value of 3.5 per inch conservatively. Some would put it up to like 4. It's essentially 95% recycled content, typically newspaper with a borate agent added to it to prevent fire and mold and insect damage or rodent infestation, things like that. It's relatively cheap. It has a relatively low embodied energy footprint, clean life cycle, as opposed to going with a whole bunch of foam. It's heavily based in petroleum. There's no way to recycle it that we have figured out just yet, et cetera, et cetera. So to get to the R values that we wanted, we opted to go with a very thick wall, approximately 12 inches thick. I've done this in the past building 2 2x4 walls and setting them 1 foot apart. That's called a double stud wall. It's relatively common. I went from doing all double stud walls to one house with TJIs as the wall studs. TJI is a engineered wooden I-joist. They're typically used in floors. But they come to whatever length you want, up to 40 feet. They're a manufactured product, so they're dead straight. And you only have to build the wall one time. So the double stud wall has a lower material cost, but considerably higher labor costs. And I think that the end product is not quite as good. So I've done a bunch of double stud walls. I've done a few with continuous exterior foam. And this is now my second house I've done with the TJI wall. And these are the straightest, squarest walls that I have ever built. So we use the TJI for the structural wall as well as the insulation cavity. And then we attach 2x3 furring strips to the inside of that. Oh, so we did the TJIs, and then we covered that with Intello, which is a smart vapor barrier. So it prevents moisture from entering the wall cavity, but it allows it to escape if moisture does get inside. And we taped all the seams pretty meticulously. So the airtight layer as well as the vapor barrier are both at the interior of the insulation plane. And then we attached 2x3 strapping to the face of those TJIs outside of the Intello wrap. And that provided us a mechanical chase to run electrical wire, plumbing supply lines, other odds and ends without needing to constantly penetrate that air barrier that we just spent so much time and effort putting up. It's a challenge if you detail your house in such a way that the air and vapor barrier are at the inside of the wall and then you sheetrock directly over it. Anytime somebody wants to mess with that sheetrock, like electricians are going to be punching holes in there by accident probably. If you want to go put a towel rack on your wall, you put a bunch of holes in it. If you want to hang a picture, you put a hole in it. So we established this 1.5 inch deep mechanical chase, and then we attached our drywall to that. And then on the exterior, we initially were talking about using zip system sheathing taped. And after some conversation, we actually ended up going with just CDX 1/2 inch plywood, which is and then on top of that, we used 15-pound asphalt felt. So we actually are building this kind of high-tech wall assembly, but the exterior is a very old-fashioned, tried and true method. That's basically the way they've been sealing up houses since the World War II. The CDX sheathing is more open to vapor moving through it, so if for some reason moisture were able to get through that vapor barrier that we put on the wall, it could theoretically then dry to the exterior without causing rot and problems. Also, just from like a health of materials standpoint, one of the guys on the crew, I've had a couple like kind of hippie guys come through that are, they don't put sunblock on, they eat organic, and they do their thing. And they were like, Yeah, I don't know what that zip paint is. I'd imagine it's like just forever chemicals for days. Like they say it's good, but it could be the next like PFAS or whatever. They're like, I'll do it. I'll cut whatever. It's part of the job, but like, I don't know. I'm not crazy about it. And so that kind of factored in as well. We were like, why don't we just use this other material that relies on positive lapse of a sheet good that you can take apart a house that was built in 1920 and it's still, everything is intact and dry and good, rather than relying on horizontal tape everywhere that has only existed for 25 years. So I was pretty excited about how that all shook out. Now we can look at some pictures. Oh, so this is something I completely skipped over. We used a helical pile foundation, partly to save on cost, partly to reduce the just amount of digging and site disturbance that we had to contend with there. So this is it when the site work is almost, no, this is just when the piers are done. So we built this, and then we had to dig for water in, sewer out, electric conduit, et cetera, but this is kind of day one getting going. There are the mounds for the septic tank being put in, but there's a septic tank before it's put in the ground. But you can see, if you've ever been to a traditional construction site with a basement or even a frost wall slab on grade, the amount of earth moving that's going on is pretty staggering compared to this. I don't believe they even trucked any of this dirt out of there. I think they just spread it around the site. They used this dirt and gave us a little bit of positive grade underneath the building to give us positive drainage out, and that was it. And there was no hauling. There was no. It was pretty cut and dry and simple. We built a pressure-treated floor deck on top of that, and we sheathed the underside of it in pressure-treated plywood. We drilled holes in that plywood and put rodent screen in there. Then we put rock wool bats inside, and then we sheathed the top. And the thinking there was that the entire floor deck we put a vapor barrier on the top and then sheathed it. So the whole floor deck could basically be submerged in water and lifted back out, and that water will all run out of there. One of the challenges with using the helical pile foundation is that you have insulated cavities that are going to be exposed to weather while the building is under construction. So figuring out how to cross that bridge is a challenge. And that was actually one of the bigger challenges that we faced. I think it took us about as long to build this deck and insulate it as it took for us to build all 4 walls, which when you see how big the walls are, that kind of says something. So these are the walls being put together, right? So this is a TJI. We made them 18 feet long, so we balloon framed the walls. So we built a big cube, and then all of the interior floors are self-supported or hung from the TJIs inside. And this enabled us to, in a typical platform framed house, you build one wall and then you build a floor on top of it. And then you get up on top of that floor and you build another wall. And every time you have a floor, all of those floor joists penetrate to the building exterior, and that wood then conducts heat or cold, however you want to look at it, conducts energy through the wood itself, which is a relatively poor insulator. So it's a point of pretty heavy heat loss. So by balloon framing the building, we have this continuous wall of 12 inches of uninterrupted cellulose insulation that goes from the floor to the ceiling with no penetrations through it. So there's one laying on the deck, ready to go. And there's it when it stood up. And I'll show you, I got a couple of videos of our method for putting these up there, which I think was pretty neat. So this is how we started out. I have these wall jacks that I've used on previous jobs. So it's like you put a galvanized pipe in this little bracket. You put it on a fir 2x4 that you brace at the bottom, and then you can crank it up, you move the wall. So we hitched a rope to the top and connected that to the truck to use as like a safety, and we're just slowly ratcheting these walls up. You can see we have braces here to, they're digging into the dirt to also help catch the wall if something terrible happened. It's nailed, toe-nailed through the bottom plate here, so it's hinging on those nails. And we've already put on the sheathing, so the wall's perfectly square, all of our blocking's in, all of our window framing, and we won't have to climb back up to sheathe that later. It's gonna be all done. So after an hour or two of that, we got pretty confident, and we just used the truck to drag it in the rest of the way. We've got these big ugly braces that we put on there when we first lifted it off the ground so it wouldn't crush anybody, and then we didn't take the time to remove them as it went up, so they really kind of ruined the shot. But yeah, and there she is. And then once we saw how successful that was, we started using the truck more. We built this thing called the Dead Man. So that, creates a fulcrum so that the rope goes from the top of the wall up over the pivot point and then back down to the truck. Otherwise, you would want to pull the wall directly off the floor deck sideways. So it transfers the movement to going up. So barely use the wall jacks. So we got it pretty well dialed in by the end. And you can see here, this is that CDX sheathing, which from a purely aesthetic standpoint, you don't realize how ugly zip is until you don't look at zip on a big, this was so much more pleasant not being a big green box, It looks like wood, it looks nice. It looks like it would dry out if you got it wet, I'm a huge fan. So that was the fourth wall that we put up. And so that's two walls on there. You can see we did 24 inches on center. So you kind of we also put little pieces of foam in between these TJIs where they bump up next to each other. There's like a rip of foam in there. This is an LVL inside and outside of that header and just a big sandwich of foam in there. So we used foam where we needed to, sparingly, where it made sense, to maximize the insulation in the envelope. I think you can really see in this picture, you get a feel for how much insulation is going to go into this thing, right? Like you can just look at that empty wall cavity. And again, we stood up all four of these walls and we did not need to shim or adjust anything. We just tipped them all up, we screwed them into each other, and they were plumb and square and ready to go. And I don't think that's because of me. I think that's the TJIs played a large role in that, and just the ability to make a wall that size in one shot. That's it from the inside on another wall. Those are those lifting jacks. Somebody taking a break on the Dead Man. So there's Sam checking out a window. It was pretty wild, framing all the windows when the floors aren't in there, right? Because you don't get a sense of how they're going to relate. We drew this up as that window seat being deep and actually acting as a bench to provide seating for the dining table. And when we tipped the wall up, you guys weren't that skeptical, but you were like, where's the floor going to go? Like, are you sure that's a seat? Like, it doesn't look like a seat. And then here we are this is them delivering the trusses, just did a simple truss roof. Macaroon took this very artistic picture of the 9 cubes of staging perfectly matching the building. I don't know how long it took him to walk around and get that angle, but that was pretty sweet. So yeah, then we just ran up there, simple truss roof as per usual. We had to wrap up the end of the sheathing from on staging, which is what it is. And then here's that 15-pound felt applied after the sheathing was completed, right? So this is just old-time house wrap, cap staples. There was some labor involved in going around the building and nailing this off. The guys may have been a little too meticulous with this nail pattern. We could have just left this exposed. They did a really nice job. But this is a very inexpensive. We saved a lot of money switching to the CDX and the asphalt felt. Asphalt felt is like nearly cheap. It's like 2 cents a square foot or something. I forget, but it's very, very inexpensive. So there was a little bit more labor, but I think it was a wash compared to doing the zip system. And again, it's just a tried and true method. And then this is a shot looking up at the ceiling. You can see the Intello wrap going on. And remember when I mentioned you can see the cavity depth and just imagine all the insulation that's going to go in there. This is the insulation dropped off before it's blown in. So these are all bales of dense packed cellulose that's going to get shot into those wall cavities. And here it is. So this is the smart vapor barrier. All the holes where the insulator punched his tube through there to dense pack the cavities. Windows installed. And this strapping is the mechanical chase that I was talking about. So that's what sheetrock is going to be attached to. This is the space after they rocked it. We had to rough in, this was a tricky part. We had to rough in our outlets and switches where they were going to be based off of invisible floors. So fortunately I had an electrician who's a good sport and seemed to appreciate the challenge. He didn't complain at all. I was just like, yeah, so this floor is here, this floor is here, and we'd like all the outlets approximately, 14, 16 inches off the floor. And he was like, okay, cool, I got it. And that was it. This is our Lunos heat recovery ventilator. There's another one on the wall behind me there. That provides fresh air to the building in an energy efficient manner. And then I didn't touch on this at all. We went with corrugated metal siding for the finish. It was another one of these decisions where the price point was an obvious factor. It's a very economical choice, especially from a material standpoint, and the labor. I mean, we were knocking out, doing the trim around the windows and corners took a while, but we were knocking out a wall every 1 to 2 days with this stuff, which, if that were shiplap up 22 feet or whatever, 27 on the high side, that would be a different animal. That was 2 guys, 2 guys, 1 wall, like a day and a half. So that was great, but it's also an extremely durable product. Doesn't require paint, doesn't require maintenance, doesn't require anybody to get up on a ladder and touch this up at a later date. Relatively low embodied energy footprint because steel is recycled frequently and repeatedly. So I think that was a very good choice on that one. And then again, also we have this super clean shape, and I think that the metal kind of accentuates the lines of this thing. I keep calling it like an ominous monolith or like an obelisk out there, and I think that the metal helps to accentuate that effect, which if that's what you're going for, that's a bonus, right? It takes light in a really interesting way, but you can just really, the form is what it is, which I would appreciate less. I want to skip ahead to an interior. So I appreciate the counterpoint between the hard, clean, simple exterior, and then you walk inside and it's this very warm, wood, intricate, kind of dynamic space inside. Because I feel like looking at this building, you would not anticipate that interior, right? And if inside of this we just had 2 flat floors, one on top of the other and it was just like, yeah, you get it, it's a box down here, it's a box up here, it's a box outside, I think the whole project would be experienced differently. So I think you really do get a different sense of the thing upon entering the front door that you really don't get from the exterior. This is, sheetrock taped and mudded. Almost no corner beat at all, like super quick. They brought in a big crew of guys, but they were in there for 3 days-ish. It was like 2 quick ones and then a week of waiting for them to come and do the last coat. But, a funny thing that I've encountered is, I don't want to go on a big tangent here, but like, if you start going down this rabbit hole, you'll see a lot of alternatives to site-built construction, like panelized structures and various types of prefab. And that's all well and good. The unfortunate thing that I have found is that the framing of the shell we're pretty good at. Like, it's not that much of a percentage of the project total. What seems to really add up are all the other things, like drywall, paint, finished floor. These are like, those 3 items that I just listed probably cost more than framing a house like this. So if you can shave 10% off your framing by getting a panelized structure sent to your site, that's great, but it doesn't really impact the end number of the project to the extent that I expected it to when I started like reaching out to these guys and getting numbers back. What does seem to have an impact, I think, is making some of these intermediate steps like as simple as possible, even making the framing as simple as possible. Doing things like getting the sheetrockers in and out in no time, having the insulator in and out. If we had to pay for a painter, things like that, I do think helped. Is that another Sam shot, or is that? But yeah, that's the paint going on. It was kind of nice as just a huge white cube. There was something about it that I liked. Sam and Chrissy built the deck. I did the design and gave them the drawings and purchased the materials, and then they provided all the labor. They saved some money that way. So that's not something that I could count on to be repeatable for future projects, but that worked out well for you guys. You did quite a bit of the heavy lifting in here. Not maybe the light lifting, but like tiling the bathroom. We had originally, all the finishing of the materials. We had originally spec'd a, floor to ceiling fiberglass tub shower insert, again for cost reasons, and they ended up going with just a bathtub and then doing a beautiful pink hexagonal tile surround inside, which would have again put us over that original budget number that we were shooting for. Oh, we overshot that original budget number way early on in schematic design. I forgot to, I buried the lead there. It's kind of an important part. But I believe with their contributions and including the site work, the septic, everything but design, I believe the project total, we haven't tallied the whole thing up just yet, but it's going to be right around 280 grand is right about where we're at, which I was pretty happy with. And again, they did a lot of the work, and like prices are climbing constantly, it's probably 300 grand is probably a more fair price. Like, there's whatever, 5 grand of tile just in there. But Sam did his own countertop. So it's probably just north of 300K, but that's site work and the whole shebang, soup to nuts. We got a couple windows off of Facebook Marketplace, saved a couple grand. So, I mean, there were some savings that kind of through their sweat they were able to achieve.
I feel like
That's
and,
true.
A communal leach field that wasn't in that.
So that's like 50 grand off the top, easily. Yeah. So yeah, that reduced the site work budget was pretty minimal on this. It was really just running utilities and the septic, and just tying back into a shared septic line, not doing a leach field. It was really fun to get to do framing after the finished work. That's a terrible picture of me. That's all good. That's not your fault. But yeah, usually like you frame the whole house and you see the rooms and the shape of everything and where the light's going to be and where the doors are, and then you do all the sheetrock and it gets dark for a while, and then you do all the paint. This was really fun where we built the whole shell and then got to like build a bunch of little, it was like building a tree house every day. And like every day we built like one new platform and then would get up on it. I'm like, oh, so this is the bedroom. This is pretty cool. You know, I got to, so from a builder's standpoint, it was really fun. This is when we're in construction. Again, we used construction grade fir for these posts, which was quite affordable. This is 2x6 spruce. Just regular number 2 framing lumber that Chrissy and Sam gave it one pass through the planer each side to take the stamps off, and then we threw it in there. Utilizing that small footprint allowed us to get away with really small spans and therefore go light on the framing lumber. So these platforms are only 6 inches thick, which is nice from a visual standpoint. Like when you're looking from the kitchen up into the bedroom, it would feel very different if that floor were a foot, which is more traditional. But it also meant that the material cost for this phase of the project was very, very low. And then we, again, used the structural sheathing as the finish, and that's it. That one's done. We went outside the box a little bit and kind of on the fly, instead of using traditional joist hangers, we went and bought just 2x2 angle steel and painted it, and then lagged it into the rim joist. So you can see this is just a GRK lag that's holding that sistered top piece together. This is another one that's then holding the ledger onto the wall. It was a loose interpretation of the code, but they'll allow you to use a 2x2 wooden nailer and set joists on top of it. So I didn't have an engineer look at it, but it seems at least as strong. And then we didn't have to look at hangers. The material cost was very low. The installation cost was comparable, so that wasn't even an upcharge. Yeah.
Is there storage underneath that dining?
Yeah, there is. We just built little magnetized. Skip ahead. So you see this? We took one sheet of plywood, right, finish, and then cut into it so that the grain all matches and it looks like one piece. And then we mounted magnet catch hardware onto the back and just drilled these little finger holes into it. So right now those panels just pop off and you set them aside. I kept pushing, I am still pushing for some kind of like cabinet carcass on casters, and then you just attach that piece of finished ply to the face, and then you could pull it all the way out. You could put a bed down there. You could put deep storage. If you have company stay, you could wheel that out. They could sleep on it during the day. You could wheel it back in. I think it'd be very cool. But we didn't do it on this one. One thing I'll say for Chrissy and Sam is they did a very good job of sticking to the plan and the budget and not adding a bunch of stuff on the fly, which as a builder you have a limited amount of control over, and like the best you can do is advise and keep people appraised of the situation as you go along to avoid an uncomfortable surprise. But that could take a project like this, and if you start like changing things and stopping progress and moving stuff, that price begins to like balloon pretty rapidly. So the changes that were made were pretty small and not very disruptive, and they did a good job of doing things like, actually don't pull one guy off of what you're doing for a week to build awesome caster things. Come back maybe in the summer, Andy, and build them then for us. That would be great. Let's just keep moving and not interrupt the flow and not add a lot of cost to the project. Yeah, this is it when it's going up. How am I doing on time here?
740.
Okay, I'll wrap it up here. You guys better have a question or two. But yeah, again, like just very simple material palette. I wouldn't call it down and dirty, but like very no frills, just white paint, fir posts, and the contrast, I think really brings the whole space to life. This is the bedroom nook here. That's the secondary, the bedroom hanging out area, the large walk-through closet. You can see the CDX finish going up. An interesting thing is that CDX plywood typically is made out of fir veneers for strength and because that's the wood that's readily available in the Pacific Northwest where they make it. So once a coat of tung oil goes on this, the fir plywood on the walls will actually match the fir post material because it's the same species, which is, I think, going to be interesting. You do have to embrace some of the imperfections, right? Like, you could look at this knot and say like, oh man, that's like a really ugly knot. But taken in aggregate, I really appreciate, it's like, why would you like a knot in a hardwood floor but not like a knot in a piece of plywood? Like, is there a difference? We build differently. We're trying to achieve different ends. The materials are doing different things. If you hang out there long enough, you start seeing interesting patterns in the plywood knots. We don't need to get into that. It's a whole other thing. There's the light moving in between the different floors. So most of the pictures that I have are just broad daylight, like even light across the space. But when they're actually in there, they'll be able to, they have a bunch of dimmers and a bunch of different lights, and they'll be able to really dial in like what's lit at what time, what spaces are getting borrowed light from the other spaces. Having these rooms so close together allowed us to not have to put a bunch of exposed conduit and fancy exposed, expensive lighting in these areas where we left the framing exposed because it's so close to adjacent lighting that they actually get enough light to be functional. What's the entry light going to go in there? This is a good picture showing kind of that different relationship between the spaces. So you're standing in the kitchen and you're looking out through the bedroom window here. We were testing out the dining table and sitting in that windowsill there. There's a nice simple bench on this side, but you can actually fit between the, there's that cool tile that they did. That's pretty nice. It's finished now. That looks, hey, can we give Chrissy and Samuel a round of applause for that tile job? That looks good. Good from far. And here is, again, looking back toward the dining room, I'm trying to find a better picture of that. We'll come back to that in a sec. This is kind of what I was talking about with the scale of the window compared to the size of the space, right? So if someone sits on this bench as part of the seating, you can actually seat, 8 people at this table? Yeah, like quite comfortably. No one has to sit on the bench back here. There's room to have the table, a chair, walk behind the chair, and then there's a built-in, and then there's the drop down to the other floor. But the whole space is only 7.5 feet deep or something like that, including the built-in depth. So by inhabiting that deep wall cavity that we have and sitting on the windowsill, we're allowed to take advantage of that part of the room. And then when you sit at that table or stand in that room, like the window feels enormous, and it's 5 feet by 7 feet. Like in the scheme of modern architecture, it is not a big window. It was the most expensive window in the house, and it was like $1,800. So yeah, that being able to like scale the whole thing down, definitely, those savings were repeated throughout the project in ways that I hadn't fully anticipated or appreciated.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
It doesn't look like you've got fire code whatever foot, inch railings that babies' heads can't fit through on all of the edges of it.
We definitely don't. There are more railings in here now, but not a 4-inch square mesh. We've talked about adding that in the future. We were actually just talking about that the other day, if you want to, but they don't presently have kids. They don't even let them in their house, which I thought was weird, but whatever.
And
But we're just not subject to that inspection here. If they want to rent it out,
was okay.
yeah, well, it's just, there's not a, for a single-family residence in Waitsfield, you do need a fire inspection. You don't need a fire inspection. If they wanted to put this thing up on Airbnb, I thought somebody was over there saying, if they wanted to put it on Airbnb, they'd have to bring everything up to code. Similar to like what you'd see in a condominium complex or an apartment. 42-inch high rail, all that jazz. But as a single-family residence that they're not renting out, it's just them living in there. Vermont's pretty lax about what you're allowed to do in your own space. So they favored just really feeling the edge and the danger in there, you know. Oh yeah, this is from upstairs looking back, right? So there's the dining room again. This is a whole gang of built-ins. So this is the washer dryer is behind here, linen closet. This is essentially their closet space. So it's like, I guess they share with this too. But it's a whole bank of storage, 30 inches deep, 28 inches deep. We got creative in here because we had a pretty limited amount of space. And we didn't want to orient the washer dryer in a different direction, and they weren't able to get one small enough to fit in the cavity that we had. So instead of building a regular door and a regular wall, we actually just routed out a track. So this is just a birch channel on the floor and a birch channel on top. And we put wax in the channel, and these are just 8-foot sheets of birch plywood slightly reinforced on the back. So there's no, like a bypass closet door, you have an 1 3/8 door and then another 1 3/8 door, and then you have jamb and casing material. So the total depth of that wall, the functional depth of the closet is decreased significantly to the point that we wouldn't be able to fit a washer dryer in there. But by going with this method, from the outside of framing to the back of the door is only like 2 1/4 inches or something like that. And it allowed us to accommodate a stacked washer dryer. And again, like no cost of door hardware, no framing. It was pretty cool. I was skeptical about how well it would function, and it works really well. Like I would do it again. There have been a lot of things in this project that I would do again, like the stepped floor. This provides mechanical chase. All the plumbing and everything is run inside the insulated envelope. It comes up through the floor and then runs around. That's one of the big challenges of building on helical piers, is that you need to get your plumbing and electrical supply into the floor system, where it's often competing for space with insulation and prone to getting cold and freezing, or leaving you with a complicated construction detail and forcing you to go underneath the house or tear up the floor if you have an issue with anything. So we were actually able to bring in the water supply from the well. That's the only thing that comes in. And then all of the plumbing just runs underneath the kitchen there. So if we have to access it, you can actually crawl in and access it through that hatch. There's storage in the hatch. They're talking about storage under the kitchen floor. So there is obviously some cost in building 5 floors instead of 1 floor, but we got a lot of practicality out of it. Like it's doing a lot of jobs besides just looking cool, in addition to like defining the space, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm gonna just boogie on through to the end here. A couple repeats. You know, one other thing that I'll say, right now there's a bunch of yellow cabinets back here. And what I have found so far in this like muted material palette, one of the nice things, I guess this is kind of not news to most of you probably, but it allows these little accent pieces to like really shine. that blue door would not look that good if it were in a